My name is Mark Dion, and I'm the artist who has worked here at the Xi'an Fortress. And the work that's done here is very much a response to the location. So it's very much built into the site. It's not something I came here with a specific idea about, but it's something that evolved as I looked at the fortress and I thought about, like with all of my work, it's a collaboration between the ideas I've worked on, the things I care about, the culture of nature I've investigated, and the site itself. And the project has really two main components. One is a site-specific installation here at the fortress, which is a remote room that you must find in the fort. It's a little bit of a hunt, a treasure hunt for this room. And inside of that room, which looks very much like a room that's been disused, that still has elements from the past, in the middle of that sits a very large bear, a bear that is deeply asleep. And we know that because we can hear it snoring. It's animated by this. You know, for me, this really has to be a very good reason to use an actual animal, you know. So this bear is artificial, but for most people, I think it would be difficult for them to tell the difference between this, my stuffed bear produced by an expert taxidermist in Scotland, and a real bear. So for them, it's not that important. And for me, it's important not to contribute in any way to the persecution of bears, you know. I often use stuffed animals, but usually they're historic animals or they're nuisance animals, and I try really to not use real animals in my work if I can avoid it. And in this case, it's very easy to avoid. So, you know, I prefer not to. And also, I think, in a very subtle way, it is a human product. It has a kind of hybridity to it, which gives it a very different kind of look and feel. So there is an acknowledgement that there's a anthropomorphic element to the work, which is a very strong thing inside the work itself. During the time when the fortress is open to the public, this piece will be continually on view. In the wintertime, as we know, bears always do something different in the wintertime. In the winter, the bear will migrate to the town, where it will spend the winter in a comfortably located on a pillow in a large vitrine. And I guess you could say the third element of the piece is really that built into the work would be a notion of a procession, that to mark the transition from winter to spring or winter to summer, the bear would be taken up in a procession up to the fortress where it would spend its summer months. The bear never wakes up. So since the early 90s, I think since 1991, I've worked with the idea of the bear. And at first I started working with polar bears, and I was very interested in the way that polar bears really resemble their environment in a very profound way. That it seems like the bear and the place it lives are really synonymous. You know, they mimic each other perfectly. And then that got me more interested in the notion of bears in general and thinking about what bears mean and how society deals with the problem of bears. And bears are really a symbol, and they mean wilderness. Where bears are, people are not, you know, and that's an important aspect of bears. I think bears are important to us as a society, as a civilization, in the same way that I believe wilderness is important. This idea that not everything can be conquered, not everything is dominable, not everything should we be able to conquer. And I think that bears are really an interesting, they really embody that concept and that crisis, and a kind of a crisis of translation that we have now from the idea that wilderness and bears are something that we have to be protected from, to the idea that wilderness and bears are something that we have to protect. And I think that that's really the main thrust of the 20th century. Of course, I always say in my work that bears are synonymous with the wilderness, but bears also embody a kind of potential violence as well. So for me, the bear is sleeping in the way that wilderness is sleeping. It's just waiting to come back. It's waiting to outlast us in a way and return. And in the same sense, I think if you think about this place as a fortress, as a place that is a response to war, that's also an aspect that is always sleeping and always ready to come back, to wake up again. In general, my work is really a consideration of the culture of nature. I'm really interested in looking at the history of ideas that have formed our attitudes toward nature. So I'm not really an ecological artist in the sense that I'm someone who's coming up with solutions for how we should behave in the future, or solutions with technology to how we could exist in a more harmonious way. I'm really trying to figure out through a history of ideas how we got to this point where we have an almost suicidal relationship to the planet. And I think also I work with a lot of institutions like natural history museums and science centers and history museums, because those are places where you can find that history. You can find that history embodied in the visual culture of those places. So, I think that those places, encoded in those places, are some of the clues to helping us understand how we get to this very strange point. Well, I do a lot of different kinds of work. So often I work with galleries or with museums. And in this case, I work in the public realm. And for me, that's one of the most exciting ways of working. Because when I work with a museum or a gallery, I know a lot about the people who are going to see that. I know a great deal about the people who are going to walk through that threshold, what their education is going to be, what their interest is going to be, even what their class is going to be. When you're working in the public, you don't have the same, you can't judge in the same way. So the audience is much broader, their interests are broader, their responses are broader, and very often they don't think that they like contemporary art because their encounters haven't been very positive. And when they see it outside of the framework it's usually presented in, I think that it is something that's interesting and challenging for them in a very positive way. And for me, it's really important when I work in the public to meet a general public halfway. I'm not really interested in making work that only a handful of art historians understand. I want the work to have a dialogue with a more broad public, and also that's where I come from. I don't come from a family that was engaged in sophisticated contemporary visual art. I come from a very working class family, but we still have a very interesting relationship with visual culture, and I think I think that audience is very interested in art if the artist is willing to meet them halfway.